Hi, dear friends from Humanities 146. Thank you so much for looking in. This is completely um, optional material, enrichment, but I hope that some of you will watch it. This is definitely history in the making, and I was very, very lucky to be there. Now, as you may remember from the main lecture, Mohenjo-Daro is one of the most ancient centers of civilization and was on my bucket list for a long time. But it's very hard to travel in Pakistan. There's actually no tourism in Pakistan at all. There are some people who go into the very north where there are high mountains, part of the Himalayas. They go hiking, they go climbing. And I found a travel agent who often arranges for these hiking tours. And I had written him years before saying, I would like to travel through Pakistan. I would like to see all your wonderful mosques and sites and historical and culturally important places. And he wrote back and said, wow, this is the first request I've ever gotten. You will need a driver, you will need a guide, and this is going to be quite expensive. And so I said, darn it, can't do it. But I also told him, help me maybe to find somebody else. So about 2 years later, he wrote to me and said, I have just heard from a person from Great Britain who also is interested in Mohenjo-Daro. She doesn't want to do anything else but Mohenjo-Daro, but why don't you connect with her and see if you and her can hook up traveling together? So I emailed her, and she turned out to be a woman slightly older than I am, just by a couple years. And she is a retired police officer in London, so she fears nothing. And she's a hobby archaeologist and hobby cultural study student. And so for her, Mohenjo-Daro was it. But she also realized that it wasn't very much fun to go there by herself, and that it would be quite expensive. So she said, I have the time. If you want to see all the other stuff, I don't care at all. Let's do your whole trip. And as long as we absolutely have to make sure we will arrive at Mohenjo-Daro and at Harappa, I'm game for whatever else you want to do. And so we signed up. And we signed up for my break in December. At the end of the fall semester, I had a 3.5 week opening between the end of the fall semester and the beginning of the winter semester. And so we took off. We took off in mid-December. We took off and we started in Islamabad. From there, we went up to Kashmir, which is a region which is highly contested with India. After that, we went to Peshawar, which is in an area where we found a lot of hostilities and where for the first time in my life I wore burqa because people were sort of very close. This is very close to Afghanistan. And so we called it the Taliban look. We got a lot of men looking at the two Western women there as if we were, completely insane, but also very much with dismissal and with anger, sort of, what are you doing here? So that was slightly uncomfortable. But then we went to Lahore. Here's Lahore. And Lahore is a very academic, open-minded, beautiful town with a big museum. And so we were really happy there. And it was in Lahore that we were caught by very unforeseen political events, which I will talk about in a little more. And it was in Lahore that everybody pretty much freaked out back home. And even our travel guide, who was back in Islamabad, he had sent us with a driver and a guide to Lahore. He was like begging us to come back and just fly home because the country was in uproar. Well, Nicola, the police officer, she said, absolutely not. We haven't been to Mohenjo-Daro, which, mind you, look at this, is down here. She's like, I'm not leaving home. What about you? I said, well, are you kidding me? I'm not afraid. We will keep going. So we had an adventure going from Lahore all the way to Mohenjo-Daro and eventually all the way to Sindh, which I went by myself. So I wanted you to see that map so you see sort of what's up. We did not go to Baluchistan. That was sort of off limits. This federally administrated tribal area is very, very dangerous. Even at the time, the closest we got was Peshawar. But this side here, the Punjab and Sindh, were actually full of wonderful things for us to see. And I inserted a couple of things here. You see, I attended a wedding. I attended an Eid. Eid is a Muslim festival that happens after you complete the Hajj and you slaughter a lot of animals. And so lots and lots of stuff there going on. Look at this. I mean, isn't this something else? This is traffic. Traffic in India, as you know, holy cow. Traffic in Pakistan, slightly different since we're Muslims, we're not Hindus, there are no cows on the road. But there are these absolutely cool buses. They reminded me of old elephants. Like in the olden days, right, when people transported stuff with elephants or camels. But these were precious, precious animals. They were your livelihood, and often these animals were decorated beautifully. So here are these buses. They are privately owned. They are somebody's livelihood. And these bus drivers, they take care of these buses probably better than they take care of their kids. They have all this decoration here. They clean them all the time. And these buses, mind you, often come from the British Empire. They come from British occupation. They are 50, 60 years old buses. These guys are the world's best mechanics, I think, because they take these old buses apart and they put them back together. They fix everything. Nothing will be lost. And so we saw all this beautiful stuff. Here, I couldn't help. I photographed some of them. Don't they look like the modern elephants? Everybody has a different truck, and they just take so much pride in these things. And down here, I actually visited. This was one of those visits where Nicola just shook her head. She said, "What do you want to visit?" I said, "I want to visit, these car mechanics. I want to see what they do." And they loved it. I spent a half a day with them looking at how they stripped these cars down to the wooden core. No joke, wooden core. Okay, I mean, traffic was just insane. You had sometimes 4 or 5 people on one little moped. You had absolutely no helmets or anything like this. You had people walking, animals walking, mopeds driving. This is an enormously overpacked truck, or tractor better, filled with cotton. And here you have the animals in between and a lot of dust kicked up. That was the scene we encountered. And it was so much pollution that both of us, Nicola and I, pretty much were coughing for, 3 weeks straight. But we lived with it. I just had to bring in more and more of these traffic pictures, right? This guy is delivering freshly hammered pots. This guy, I don't know what is he bringing or taking trash. Here is a camel load full, and here is a huge tractor full of quarried material. So our stay in Lahore, this is Lahore. I also want you to know that at this time they were gearing up towards elections. And in many other countries, when democracy is not as well established as it is in our country, you have not only political divides as we have, and you have people yelling at each other maybe, or being, uncivilized when it comes to political differences. You literally have to expect violence. I mean, there is violence. These are always tense times when you have to decide between these different political parties. Now, many people cannot read, and so here you see all these political posters here, which advertise for particular parties, but I can't read this like many others. But look, do you see in these posters? Here is the tiger. So this is the Tiger Party. So this guy is associated with the Tiger Party. There is the Bicycle Party. There was the Teacup Party. And there is the party, the People's Party, with this green and black and red arrow here. This was the party of Benazir Bhutto. And you have to do some Googling if you want to. But Benazir Bhutto comes from one of the noble families there. She has a long history of political involvement. Many of her relatives, father, brothers, got assassinated before her. She lived in exile, but for this election, she came back and she ran for the People's Party. So big deal. We had been instructed to stay away from any and all political rallies, and sorry, here is one, but I, for the most part, observed that. Here's the Tiger Party. See the tiger again, right? So at one point we just walked through the streets from, coming back from a site, and there was this rally, and for a few minutes we watched, but then we took our distance, because quite often, parties like this would be disrupted by sometimes suicide bombers, sometimes just gangs who would start, causing trouble. It's different. So Lahore has one of the best museums in the entire country. So we spent a full day there at the National Museum, seeing some of the old Buddhist art, old Hindu art, and especially the prehistoric art that goes all the way back to Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Now, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa ended up on Pakistan soil, but Pakistan and India were split. Pretty much just like Israel and Palestine were split at one point. The British government pretty much drew a line in the sand, and we had separatists working for that. Do some research. You can Google all of this. But all these ancient treasures were simply divided. Half of them went to India, half of them remained in Pakistan, and this is the museum where you go to see them. Here are probably the two most precious objects from the prehistoric times. This is a prince from Mohenjo-Daro, and this is a little dancing girl, which ended up in India. But this prince here, look at it, is from 2500 to 1500 BC, a little ivory figure, just absolutely gorgeous. All right, so we had come from the day in the museum. We went back home to our room, literally, and since it got dark pretty early, it was probably only 5:30 or so, when the news came on. And in the evening news, we had our windows open, it was warm, and they announced right here, and we caught it on TV, that Benazir Bhutto at a rally back in Islamabad had been shot, fatally shot, that she was in the museum. The story was unfolding. For the next few minutes or so, we listened to the announcer, and all of a sudden the announcement came: Benazir Bhutto has been declared dead. You have no idea what happened after that. Imagine everybody had their TV on, everybody had their window open. If you can imagine a sports game and one side scores, the roar, everybody in front of their TV was roaring, was screaming, and we heard those roars, and we literally froze in our room and said, oh my God, what now? So we went out of our hotel room and into the lobby and were immediately shushed back. People said, you stay in your room and you are not leaving. And we understood within a few minutes why. Because people now took to the streets in anger, and even though there were absolutely no facts available from nobody knew who the assassin was, nobody knew what happened, everybody only knew Benazir Bhutto was dead, and everybody blamed the government. So at that point, people in anger, I have no idea, I cannot fully explain why people in anger think that it is okay to just indiscriminately let out your anger. Literally in front of our streets. And you look at the upper right picture, that's the only picture I have from that time, from that night. People were stopping cars with iron sticks and just clubbing down cars. They didn't care who was inside the car. You could be hit. Your car was smashed. People were kicked off their mopeds. Within literally half an hour, the streets were completely empty. The government shut down all electricity, so it was pitch dark. And I snuck by some of the minders that we had in the hotel lobby. We were in the second or third floor. And instead of taking the elevator, I walked all the way up to the rooftop and I photographed people right in front of our hotel, burning tires and screaming and clubbing and rioting. And the reason that we were right next to the action here was that we realized that our hotel was right next to the headquarters of the People's Party, which you see in the upper left here. The next morning, we realized that this was the People's headquarters. So the next morning, in front of our hotel and in front of that headquarters, hundreds of people gathered to now march through the streets. So the daylight had come back, people came out again, and the anger was just as great as the night before. You also see a lot of riot gear people here. I have to say it. The riot police were out immediately, tried to stop the worst and protect civilians. This ushered in a 3-day minimum general strike, which meant that every store was closed, gas stations were closed, that the army was setting up little posts on the street corners, the riot police were out, and we said literally that night, the night before actually, we were sitting in our hotel restaurant. We still had food there. There were still some people, they couldn't go home, so they had to do a double shift. We heard bombs going off. We had our hotel shaking. We heard glass shattering. And I cannot exactly say that I felt very comfortable. On the other hand, I kept telling myself, and I am a stoic, that I will only get excited and frightened when the scare is right in front of me, and that there are a couple million people living in this town and not everybody is rioting, in fact only a fraction, and that somehow people will survive this. And we did. So the next day, we saw that everything was closed, and I talked to my guide. Nicola and I had decided not to go back despite any pleading. And we decided to move forward, but the guy said, well, I have no gas, and the gas stations are closed. And I said to him, are you afraid to go out at night? And he said, no. He said, why? I said, well, if there is a general strike and all the gas stations are closed, I bet you that there's a black market. Let's find the black market, let's get gas, and tomorrow morning let's get out of here. And he looked at me like I had lost my marbles. He said, look, I'm a Muslim. Allah knows when I die, so I have no problem going out because Allah knows. But what about you? And I said to him, okay, I don't believe in Allah. And I'm okay with that I don't know when I'm dying, and that maybe nobody knows when I'm dying. And if I die tomorrow or here, then I guess that's been it. So let's go and look for the black market. Now, Nicolas and our guide, he was the driver. Did I say guide? He was the driver I talked to. So the guide and Nicolas stayed behind, shaking their heads, and the driver and I took out in the dark, and lo and behold, we found a gas station, which had a tiny little dim light flickering, which we saw behind one of these curtains, right? And I said, there it is, there's some light, there's somebody there. We paid triple price for our tank full of gas, but we got gas and we were on our road the next day. In the lower left here, you see the roads. Remember how full the roads were? There were always mopeds and tractors and animals and loads that you couldn't believe. This was a 4-lane highway. There was a woman there. She thought, oh, this is a good time for me to walk my goats across the street. So we actually had the entire highway, the entire place to ourselves. We got out of town almost safely. We saw a few riots in the distance, so we took a different turn, and we saw these posters in between. And you know, we knew that this would last for a while. This is, of course, Benazir Bhutto. Here is her party symbol, and this was the governor, the next most important person in the whole country who was running her campaign. We made it to Harappa on December 29th, and we met an American archaeologist who was there for the season. He was highly surprised to see the two adventurous women here, and he invited us to a very special dinner. Unfortunately, I had a very sick stomach that day, and I could only eat a little bit. But he was wonderful. He showed us Harappa, and I'm not gonna dwell on that. But in fact, I will stay here. I should have brought in more pictures of Harappa, but we got, of course, a VIP tour of the whole site, and it was fascinating. We wanted to go to Mohenjo-Daro, and we had actually planned to go there by train. But the trains were all... Oh no, what am I saying? Yes. I'm getting the sequence a little out, but it doesn't really matter in the end. So our next station was to be reached by plane. So we would have left our driver and our guide behind, boarded a train, done an overnight train, and then met our next guide down in the south in Sindh. That was not possible because this is what the trains looked like. Trains were government run, and so over the country, people had set trains ablaze. I can just only thank the heavens that this didn't happen 2 days earlier when we were on the train and would have been there. And who knows, I think they let people out for the most part, but you probably would have lost your luggage and you would have been injured or trampled or run away or I don't know what, and we would have stood in the middle of nowhere with our train burning behind us. So we got lucky that we knew that we couldn't take the train. We took the plane, and I remember that on the plane, it was actually, we were leaving there on New Year's Eve. Now, I had lost complete track of time and place, really. I mean, when you're under so much stress and when you're in a high tense situation like this, I really didn't know what day it was or what time of the day it was. But we boarded a half-empty plane because most people with their head straight on had canceled their flights. So we had no problem within an hour getting a seat on that plane and flying all the way south to Sindh to reach our final destination, Mohenjo-Daro. And on the plane, can you imagine, in English, the pilot himself welcomed the two foreign ladies, wished us a happy new year and congratulated us to the new year and thanked us for being there, wished us a safe travel. And at that point, when I heard that English and I heard that announcement and I realized it was New Year's Eve, I just fell apart. I just bawled for at least half an hour, crying, just not about anything in particular. It was just the tension that finally sort of left me, and I finally let it all out, and I was like, okay, we're on a plane, we're one step further, we're still safe. So in Sindh, the destruction was particularly heavy because Sindh was the birth province of Benazir Bhutto. She was beloved. The entire province loved her and her family, and they went berserk. We arrived in Mohenjo-Daro on January 1st, and there is the site director who actually for several years hadn't seen any foreigners, but certainly the site was deserted. He welcomed us, and you see here, I put on my little Benazir Bhutto pin, and he welcomed us, and he said, "You are my VIPs. Whatever you would like to do, I'm here to do it for you." And I looked at him and said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "What I really want to do is see Benazir Bhutto's grave." And he looked at me, he literally jumped backwards. And he said, "Okay, let me rephrase this. You can ask for anything reasonable, and I will do it for you." So I guess going to Benazir Bhutto's grave was not reasonable. Well, you know me. I do not take no for an answer when I think that there might just be any possibility. Every day, and we spent there 3 days, every day he came and said, "What can I do for you ladies today? What would you like to do?" And sometimes he made us a special meal, and sometimes he gave us a special guide for the site. And every day I said, "If you really are asking, I would like to go to Benazir Bhutto's grave." Well, okay. They had put a special police guard outside the site. We were the only visitors. They were taking care of us. And one morning we were out at Mohenjo-Daro, and it was absolutely beautiful. And Nicola and I were strolling through the morning mist. And the VIP director there came running into the field and said, "Elizabeth," or actually he said, Elizabeth, "I found a driver. He will take you to Benazir Bhutto's grave. Do you still want to go? He wants a month's salary for this." And I'm like, oh my God, do I want to go? Absolutely do I want to go. Now, thank goodness, a month's salary was about $250 or $300. I paid that. I know I'm crazy, but I paid that. And then he looked at me and said, "Well, well, I can't let you go by yourself. That's not safe, and it's not the gentleman way to do. So I have to come with you. And then he sort of smiled at me and winked and said, I was just too afraid to go by myself. But if you go, I will go. And I so want to see her grave myself. So that was really hilarious. Now, Nicola, mind you, she would say, are you out of your mind? I have seen enough blood in my life. I don't need to see Benazir Bhutto's grave. I will spend my day at Mohenjo-Daro. So we took the back roads because the main roads were full of tanks and police and whatnot. So we took the back roads, and look at this. This is one that I just photographed out of the back window of my car. This was a group of women who had been on the road for days walking to Benazir Bhutto's grave. With all the police and rioting and everywhere, I couldn't believe it. We come to Benazir Bhutto's family mausoleum, and look at this. It looks like the Taj Mahal. That tells you a couple things. First of all, it tells you that they are super rich. These are the old feudal lords. This is a family with millions of dollars who has ruled, in a sense, as little, feudal kings this area for centuries. Also, absolutely nobody here, was worried that there would be any riots or anything happening to her mausoleum, because these people were 100% on Benazir Bhutto's side. Only her friends, only people who would mourn for her would make it this far out. So we got there, and there I am here. My VIP guy took a picture of me. I was actually with my little camera videotaping these worshippers. And they were, of course, staring at me, absolutely staring at me. And I had no idea what they were all whispering, but they were whispering, they were taking my picture. And eventually I realized, oh my God, look at me. What did I forget? I forgot my head cover. I was out in the field with Nicola. I didn't dress appropriately for Pakistan. Remember, in the upper western provinces, I had to wear a burqa. Everywhere I had to wear head cover. I had just run off the field, off the archaeological site, into my taxi, and off I was. But not a single person there was mad at me. And the guy told me that what they were whispering was like, look at this foreign woman. She came all the way to mourn with us. I was so touched. I was in tears. I was so touched about these people. And I have to admit, I was humiliated too, because I have a very split opinion about Benazir Bhutto. Benazir Bhutto is as much the solution as she was the problem. I cried because of the overwhelming emotions I had being part of this much of history, that I was right there. These people loved her indiscriminately and unconditionally, and I couldn't quite go there, but they didn't know that, and they accepted me, and they embraced me and my being there. Here's the story and how it ends, and that is even more humbling for me, and this is probably one of the most emotional trips that I have ever had in my life. So the taxi driver, here's my VIP guy, right? The taxi driver on his way back said, I don't have enough gasoline, we have to get gas. Now, by this time, once in a while, there was a gas station that was allowed to be open, and you had literally hours and hours of cars wrapping around the blocks, lining up to get gas. I just took a little tiny picture here. When we got in line to get gas, I got out of the car and I started photographing, and I knew this would take an hour and a half or two before we would get gas, so I was roaming around. And you could see, I don't look like the people from Pakistan, right? And I had no head cover, still didn't. So I was walking around, and people were pointing at me, said, no, who is that? Who is that? And the driver said, oh, she just came back from Benazir Bhutto's grave. She visited Benazir Bhutto's grave. So like a wildfire, this went through the whole, every car was passing on the news. There's a foreign woman, the German American, had just visited Benazir Bhutto's grave. Most of these people were too afraid to go to Benazir Bhutto's grave. So before we knew it, the gas station owner came to our car, ushered us to the front of the line, and offered us a cup of tea. He said, "You have to have a cup of tea with me." And offering somebody a cup of tea is just about the biggest gesture of friendship you can offer to a stranger. There is a big saying, right? 1 cup of tea, you are best friends. 2 cup of tea, you're practically family. And 3 cups of tea, you're inseparable. And you give your life for somebody. So we had a cup of tea, and people were coming and gesturing towards us, and in friendly ways, right? Sort of waving and even bowing. And the next day, we were scheduled to leave. And our VIP guy took us to the airport, and he said, "You have no idea what just happened. I took the bus to the site, and in the bus, everybody was talking about the German American who had visited Benazir Bhutto's grave." So I became the talk of the province. And at the airport, Nicola and I sat down, and we were, chatting. We had an hour before the plane left. And before we knew it, we had cups of tea showing up at our desk, or at our table every few minutes. Somebody just sent cups of tea to us as gestures of friendship and welcome. And when I had to go through the control, you are always separated into men and women. The women actually who were supposed to search me, they touched their heart, and then they touched my forehead, and they bowed, and they clasped their hand in front of their chest, and they bowed to me, and they just, without saying anything, I didn't speak their language and they didn't speak mine. They just gestured their gratitude and their thank you that I had come and shown Benazir Bhutto honor. As I said, I was so humbled. This will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I wouldn't have missed it under any circumstances. Being part of history is why I travel. Sometimes people say I'm crazy. I didn't choose to go into this difficult situation, but once I was there, I realized what an absolutely unique occasion that was. So, you guys, stay out of trouble, says somebody who sometimes gets into trouble, but stay out of trouble, really. Stay healthy and study for your final exam. There will be more information on that. We will have a go-to meeting tonight, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. Bye.